Women have been giving birth for centuries, so it's a pretty natural experience, right? Wrong. I'm Stephanie King, professional doula, childbirth educator, and the creator of the My Essential Birth course, the online childbirth education course that's helping women everywhere confidently achieve their best birth. Today's culture would have us think that birth should be treated like an illness or an emergency, and that most of us need other people telling us what's best for our bodies because we aren't the experts. So sit tight, because if you're tuning into this podcast, you'll probably start to believe in your body, your intuition, and find yourself empowered and confident to do what it takes to have the birth of your dreams. If you like listening to me take you through these weekly topics step by step, then you're going to love the My Essential Birth course. Make sure that you're subscribed to the podcast, and definitely head over to myessentialbirth.com for the free downloads mentioned right here in these episodes, and to join the birth course and community full of pregnant moms just like you. I have to add a disclaimer that I am not a medical professional and I cannot provide medical advice. All of the information expressed in this podcast are based off of personal, professional, and educational experiences and are my own opinions. Please work with a provider you trust for medical advice during your pregnancy and birth. Welcome back, ladies, to this week's podcast. And our reviewer of the week is, wish me luck on this one, it is Names, B-R-R, Namesburr. Johnson. And she says, fantastic podcast through and through. Hi, Stephanie. I found out I was pregnant with my first last March. Your podcast was recommended to me by a friend as she knew I was interested in a, quote, natural birth. Though my initial desire was there, you were the influence that fully converted me. Yay! I'm so excited about that. From the first episode, I was hooked. And thanks to slyly listening to one of your episodes while my husband was in the room, you sparked his interest. Can we just add that to everyone's list? Yes, please slyly listen to these episodes with your husbands in the room. Before that, he was unconvinced that a home birth would be safe. He has now become a fully converted advocate for natural childbirth. My husband can relate to that too, 100%. You were the catalyst that led us to 3 different birth courses worth of knowledge. And it seemed like whenever I had a question those other courses didn't answer, you knew, because you'd release an episode that week on the very thing I needed help with. I hope you know how inspired you are. Armed with knowledge and as many tools as I could gather leading up to my birth, I had an amazing and adventurous labor and delivery experience lasting under 4 hours start to finish. That is incredible. That is what we call a precipitous birth. That's crazy. I felt empowered and confident the whole time because I knew what to do and had a wonderful support system. And so much of that I owe to the things I learned from you and this podcast. Thank you for being such a powerful and informed advocate for women around the world, and for encouraging them through education to tune into the power within them, enabling them to confidently accomplish the most important and life-changing adventure of their life, aka the bearing of children. You are wonderful. Thank you, Brianna Johnson. Oh, there it is. There's the name. Thank you, Brianna. What a really neat review to read. I greatly appreciate that. I love hearing when you guys have these experiences that you just set yourself up for success, and you can come back and tell the world that birth is normal and natural and wonderful and anyone can do it, because that's exactly what happened for me. I'm excited today, you guys. I was just telling our guest here, this is my favorite part of what I do on the podcast, and that is listening to you guys tell your birth stories. So I have a mom here today, a My Essential Birth student who has had an incredible birth, and she's here to share it with all of you. So Starlee, will you take a moment, please, and introduce yourself, talk a little about yourself, your family, and just a little about you.
Yeah. I am from Utah. I'm 27. I'm a first-time mom. Before having baby, I worked as a CPA in a tax firm. So did a lot of taxes. I definitely had my busy seasons, and that kind of definitely played a part in the pregnancy, but it was good. And yeah, just loving my little boy and love being outdoors, camping, hiking, boating, anything outside is great.
Awesome. And if you don't mind, would you take a moment and share a little bit about like your kind of pregnancy journey? Because it wasn't so easy for you guys. Is that right?
That is correct. Yeah. So we tried for almost 2 years, actually. I had an IUD in before, and as soon as I got it out, I never had a period ever again. So that was really concerning and very emotional. And I had always had a normal cycle leading up to having my IUD in, and something in that hit my hormones and nothing came back correctly. So I went to my, family practice or my family primary care physician. And she was like, I think it's time to go find or talk to your OB. So I went to an OB. We worked with her for like 6 months and we did a lot of different rounds of Clomid and Femara to try to induce ovulation. But with an OB, it was really frustrating. So basically she would give me the medication. And then on day 21, I would go in and get a blood draw and it would either confirm, yes, you ovulated or no, you did not. And I never got an ovulation. So then it was like the whole cycle's over. We had to wait. But then I didn't ovulate. So I wouldn't start a period on my own. So then at day like 40, I would take a pill to induce a period, which is another 10 days. So I felt like every cycle was like 2 months long and it was so frustrating. So then, after about 5 cycles with her, we decided it's time to move to a fertility clinic. And we did, and we got ovulation the first month.
Oh, good for you. That's awesome.
So
what a difference. What an important thing for you to be saying right here, right now for women who are listening.
Yes, totally. And if I were to do it again, I would go to a fertility specialist sooner. And that's the advice I give everyone, that they know it's worth paying the extra money. A lot of it's out of pocket, but it is so worth it. Just the way they monitor more during the cycle. So I would go in and get ultrasounds every couple of days to see if my follicles or the eggs were growing on my ovaries. And then if they weren't, they could give me more medication so that we didn't lose the whole cycle. So we could redose, take more medication until it was right. And then I would give myself a shot to trigger ovulation. And then we knew the timing. Because then it doesn't drag out for 2 months and then I don't have to take an extra pill to start a period and all of that. So that was such a big blessing. And we did a handful of IUIs and we just weren't getting anywhere. And I had a test done. It's called the HSG test. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Basically, they're looking at the tubes with some dye and X-ray to see if they're open and if eggs can pass through them and whatnot. And my left one looked just fine, but my right one, when she pushed the dye through, it looked like really swollen. And so then there was like fluid buildup in there. And she said, with the fluid buildup and the swelling, even if an egg makes it down the left side, that fluid can leak down into the uterus and basically make it uninhabitable for a pregnancy. So that was really depressing. And we decided to go ahead and do surgery. And I was so hesitant. And I'm like, if it looks anywhere remotely okay, I don't want you to take it out, because she was going to do another HSG test in surgery to confirm before she took it out. And she took it out. And I came out of surgery and I was so emotional. I was so happy that we were taking the next step, but I was so emotional thinking okay, there's potentially half of my fertility. Am I being too impatient? Did I not try hard enough? And all of those feelings. But on the first IUI after, we happened to get pregnant. So I'm hoping that was the issue and that it's not going to cause more issues in the future.
That's so neat.
Yeah, we were to a point, I guess it was our second cycle after the surgery, because my first cycle, I only grew follicles on the right side. And I told her, I don't want to continue if I only get it on the side that I don't have a tube, because I'm not going to put money into that. And I don't want to emotionally stress about hoping, but knowing that there's really not much of a chance. So second cycle after, we ended up getting pregnant and it was amazing. And I loved pregnancy.
Awesome. Okay. So with that, tell me a little bit about your pregnancy. So all of that rough stuff to be able to get pregnant, you get the positive. What was your pregnancy like?
Overall, it was so good. I absolutely loved being pregnant. And I don't know if it was partly just because I had wanted it for so long. But I also had a really pretty easy pregnancy. I try not to say this that often, but I never, I puked once during my entire pregnancy at 36 weeks. And it's because I took my vitamins on an empty stomach. I never was that sick and I just felt so good. I exercised every day. I loved walking and lifting weights and just continuing my active lifestyle. I guess at the beginning of pregnancy, after doing an IUI and I was monitored really early on, I guess from the fertility clinic, I started getting ultrasounds at 7 weeks. And they did find like a small bleed that they were a little bit concerned about. So I was on rest for a couple weeks, and then I started fainting a lot. And yeah, but that eventually kind of resolved. I just learned how to move really slow after standing up, or sitting up out of bed, waiting for 30 seconds, then standing up, waiting for 30 seconds, then moving. And that eventually wore off, and I had a great pregnancy. I loved it.
That's awesome. Did you have anything during your pregnancy where you had like, they changed a due date, or, measurements were off? Was there anything GBS positive, a broken bag of water? Were there any like complications or any tricky things that you had to deal with throughout that pregnancy at all?
Change of due date, no. I was very specific. I never told them when my last period was, because I just told them I was an IUI. I know exactly a 36-hour window. I know when the baby was conceived. Because I didn't want to have any questions on that. I kind of assumed I would go 41, 42 weeks. That's kind of what my family has done. So I mentally was prepared for the long haul. And let's see, at 30, I can't remember when they do the test. They do I guess I did the glucose test at like 26 weeks, and I was actually under the normal limit. Like my sugars were really low even after the drink. So that wasn't a concern though. They were just like, make sure you bring snacks. You're going to need it. And I did test GBS positive, and I was completely devastated and so depressed, and talked to my provider for like a full hour after. And my providers were so good. I ended up switching providers actually at like 26 weeks. And my new providers, they were both midwives, but I was really glad I switched. My doula had suggested that after I told her my birth plan. She said, I think these midwives would really mesh well with you. And so I tried them out and loved them. And yeah, so they were so good. They sat down and talked to me about GBS, and I tried to retest and wanted to get a negative test. I was really hoping to get a negative and not do antibiotics. In the end, we decided we did want to do the antibiotics and just, hope for the best and do probiotics after birth.
Yeah. When you said that you talked with them for an hour, my first thought was, I wonder what kind of provider you had. So I'm glad that you shared about that. So will you maybe just for a moment talk about what was the difference for you? What made it feel so much better to be with those midwives that were recommended by the doula versus who you had as an OB? Because it sounds like it wasn't a terrible thing with your OB. It wasn't like on your mind to switch. It was kind of the doula saying, this birth plan is going to be supported here.
Totally. I was actually with midwives at the beginning, and they were good, but I do feel like they were they had more of a thought process of an OB. They definitely had like lower, like when I asked them all their statistics of episiotomy and forceps and all of that, like they had really low, kind of more like a midwife. But when I would ask them questions, they were very closed off to anything. Like even I asked them about the glucose test, and they said, yeah, no, you have to take ours. There's no substitutes. And I'm like, really? I don't think that's true. And they're like, well, we can do a randomized glucose test, and it'll just be for you, and you can decide what you want to do from there. And when I went to my new midwives and I asked them about it, and she gave me this whole list of like all these alternatives that she accepts and that she sees as fine. And other differences, like I had asked her, I'm like, my first midwives, I'm like, do you care if I eat during labor? And she's like, well, yeah, that's fine. Like, I'll just turn my head. It doesn't matter. Like, we get that that's okay. Whereas when I asked my actual midwives, the second ones, they were like, oh yeah, we tell everybody bring in food. The nurses know what we do and we accept it. Like they just were so much more of like, we know the evidence and we are going to run that way. We're not going to try to hide anything. Our hospitals know how we practice, so it's fine.
That's awesome. So did you end up switching hospitals too?
Uh-huh.
They were both in hospital providers. That's awesome.
Yep.
That's awesome. Doing the work, it makes such a difference. I think I was just messaging with somebody recently this last week on Instagram. It was a mom who had reached out and kind of like, my doctor's saying this and this. And anyways, just realizing that when we're hearing information back from our providers, even those that we like, that is one or two people's opinions. It is their personal, professional, medical opinion. But it is their opinion. And you can see the evidence in that, because if you go to a different provider, they provide you with different professional medical advice that is their opinion. And so that's where it gives us that power as a mom to understand that there are different ways that different providers practice. And it doesn't mean that one is safer or better than the other, in particular, like in regards to us. Like, we get to choose those things, what feels right to us. So I love that you shared that. I actually love that they were both midwives and that was your experience. And it sounds like the second one was a better fit for you, which is just awesome. I love that. Some moms are going to feel more comfortable with the more medicalized midwife, so that could be someone for them. So I really appreciate you sharing that. That's really neat. For a moment, will you talk a little bit about your birth partner, how he supported you, what that looked like early on? It kind of makes me think of the reviewer of the week at the beginning. Was he like super gung-ho from the beginning, or were you slyly having him listen to the podcast?
I couldn't even get him to slyly listen. No.
Tell me more. Let's hear about that.
I really tried. No, so this is funny. And you kind of have to know him. He's just funny and he's very blunt. But we had just found out we were pregnant. I was maybe 9 or 10 weeks, and we were driving in the car, and we were driving home from a friend's house. And I had been talking to her. She was pregnant as well. And she was like, yeah, I think I want to go unmedicated, yada, yada. She's telling me all about it. And I've kind of wanted to go unmedicated my entire life. Like, I always thought that would be so cool. So we're in the car and I'm telling him, like, she really is going to try to go unmedicated. And he's like, wow, that's crazy. And I'm like, honey, I want to go unmedicated. He goes, what? Why would you want to do that? If there's options available, why would you do that? That's crazy. And I'm like, I don't know. I've just always wanted to do it. I believe my body can do this. And this is how God made my body, and it's going to happen. And he's like, yeah, he was like, okay, that's fine if that's what you want to do, but I would never choose that. I'm like, okay, that's fine. You're not the one giving birth. So he's very much more wanted everything. If it were his choice, if he were giving birth, he would want a very medicalized everything their birth. And so he was very much supportive of what I wanted, but I feel like there were a lot of conversations of explaining why I wanted what I wanted, and helping him understand and be able to support me in that way, because that was not his like natural instinct of what he wanted or what he would choose for himself,
Yeah. So how did that lead to, and did he take the birth course with you? Like, what got you guys into that preparation state?
Yeah. So I had been listening to the podcast, and I bought the course really early on, and we just did like one a week. Sometimes we drag it into 2 weeks, but we just did it, and he would listen to all of them, and we'd kind of talk through the different points. I loved in the birth course, it gives so many, I feel like you did such a good job of showing all the different options and not being biased to one side or the other side, or it was just a very round education of all the possibilities. And I really appreciated that. And I think some of those things, when we talked about epidurals and whatnot, he could see some of the downfalls of, oh yeah, it does slow down labor. And he could see there's reasoning behind letting your body do what it's supposed to do. And we worked through it, and he did all the birth course with me. And I loved the class on, what's it called? The counter pressure.
Yeah. So like how God can physically support you.
Yes. And I think that was really good for him too, because we just practiced them all after, and he actually felt like, oh, I am going to be a part of this. I'm not just a passive learner here. Like, I've got to know what I'm doing, and I'm going to be a big support. And then with that, I guess we hired a doula, which was really important to me. My husband can get kind of anxious, and I knew in a situation like this, he was going to be kind of anxious, and he gets really low blood sugar. So I was just like, I just want to have somebody there that can coach him as much as they can coach me, and be there to help him support me. And that was kind of our main goal in getting the doula, and it worked out perfectly. We were both so happy with her in the end, and having her, we had some prenatal appointments, and they came in, she taught us some counter pressure and whatnot. And she was like, oh, you have already know this? How do you guys know this? And I'm like, oh, our birth course taught us. That's awesome. She was like, oh, I'm impressed. This is great. So yeah, I feel like that was most of our preparation as the birth course and our doula. Yeah.
I love that it brought on those good conversations because, and I think I've shared this before, but I would teach birth courses and it happens online too. But like when I would teach them in my home, that was like my favorite thing. We'd have like 8 couples and, you know, first class, like, okay, guys, like how many of you were dragged here by your wife? And, you know, like everyone hand goes up, right? And then a couple classes in and like by class 5, I think it was class 5 that I had my husband come in and I'd have him share his experience or whatever. And it's like the guys really open up and it's kind of this like, yeah, I didn't see the point in being here. I didn't necessarily want to be here. And I'm really glad I know this stuff. And I, you know, especially for men, I think it's important that they have an active role. They're naturally, they want to help. They want to protect. They want to, you know, that's like kind of what they do naturally, inherently. And a lot of men do get pushed to the side in the birth process when both mom and dad don't really know what to expect. And you're in the birth space and you've got other people who are professionals who are, you know, taking care of mom and telling mom what to do and kind of telling dad what to do or not to do. And it leaves them on the sidelines, you know, and then women are like, well, you were sitting on your phone and not really giving me what I needed. And he's like, I didn't even know what to give you, you know? So it just, instead of it being this really sweet bonding experience, it becomes a bit of confusion and feeling like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just here, especially for the guys. So I love that part of the birth course.
And to add to that, I think, like I said, he can get pretty anxious. And I feel like knowledge was totally power for him, that he could understand a lot of things. And it took a lot of the anxiety away because he knew what to expect. And that was very helpful.
I'm curious too, since you guys did have an opportunity to meet with a doula beforehand, did you meet with her? It sounded like you met with her after you had taken parts of the birth course. So how do you feel like that added well to, and for him too, even though he's not here to ask, I'm sure that you guys have talked about that. How do you think the doula, having another person there that was knowledgeable about birth, third party, helped you guys feel comfortable or prepared even more so?
I think it both just gave us a lot of confidence that we have someone else on our team, that even since we were so emotionally invested, obviously in our baby and our birth process and everything, to have a third party that knew exactly our wishes and that wasn't emotionally invested and that would help us get that, even if things were going not the right way or we were stressed or whatever twist or turn came, that we knew somebody was there advocating just for us and knew exactly what we wanted.
Yeah, I love that. Talk to me just for a moment, and then I want to get into the birth story, my very favorite part. Tell me a little bit about what you did for preparing as you were coming up to birth. So I'm going to assume, you can tell me if you did them or not, though. I'm going to assume you did things like the 3 exercises, relaxation practice. It sounds like you did some hands-on physical things with each other, maybe massage. What did that look like kind of on a daily basis for you guys when you were preparing for the birth?
Yeah. I think I started doing like the 3 free exercises, maybe at like 10 or 12 weeks, right when I found out. And I was binging all your podcast episodes. I started right away doing that. I would have to say there were times that I did really good and that it was weekly or daily. And it would go for weeks at a time and I was really good. And then there were other times where several days had passed and I'd be like, oh crap, I need to get on this. I don't want to miss out on these. I need to be doing I honestly, the deep squat, I never could hold for 15 minutes at a time. I could do like 5-minute segments and I would try to do that 3 times a day. So we worked through, I did that. And then I did a lot of meditations. I used yours as well as my sister had a birth course. And so I borrowed some of her tracks that she had used that she really liked, just because I was trying to do that every night and I needed some variation. So I kind of mixed it a bunch. And then I was like looking up some on Spotify, just kind of trying to find something every day to do. And I really loved the meditations. Those were really good for me. I fell asleep every night to them. I very rarely ever made it awake through one of them, I feel like.
Yeah, that's great. Was there anything coming up to the birth, any kind of birth preparation that you did in the way of like, did you drink red raspberry leaf tea? Did you ever use clary sage, evening primrose oil? Did you do anything to start labor? What did that look like for you?
I did start drinking red raspberry leaf tea around 34 weeks, I think. And then at my 36-week appointment, I asked her if it was okay. And she's like, yeah, you can start that at 37 weeks. I'm like, whoops, I guess it's fine. So yeah, I did the tea. I had really good intentions to eat dates, and I don't know what happened. I just didn't get around to it. I did do a little bit of clary sage. Actually, no, I didn't. I bought it and took it to the hospital, but I didn't use it beforehand. But I did do the pressure points on the ankles that a lot of times you combine that with. Maybe around 37 weeks, I started doing that. But honestly, I was really content being pregnant until about 37 weeks. Before then, I was kind of just thinking like, I'm not ready to be done. I don't want to be done being pregnant. Like, I'm excited for the baby, but I'm not done. I love this. And then 37 weeks hit and I started to get really uncomfortable. I'm like, okay, baby can come now. I'm ready. And I had actually texted my doula, and she sent me a couple of like YouTube videos of exercises. I mean, to help induce labor, right? Whether or not that works or not, who knows? But, yeah, just different exercises. And a lot of them were similar to, I guess, the ones in the birth course of like exaggerated side lying and different things like that, that I started around probably 38 weeks when I was like, okay, I'm ready to be done.
Okay. So walk me through your birth from that very first contraction.
Okay. So I guess leading up to that, actually, at my 37-week appointment, I decided to get checked. I had actually talked to my midwife about it. I'm like, I don't want to get checked until I'm at the hospital. I'm in labor. And she's like, that's fine. And I'm like, wait, but you're asking me if I want to be checked. Why would you suggest that? And she's like, well, the only reason I would suggest it, it's not going to tell us a ton, but it will tell us if you should pick up on evening primrose oil, or if you should maybe do more red raspberry leaf tea. It can help us know if we want to try to help get your body more ready. And I'm like, okay, yeah, that's fair. That's a good reason. You can check me. So I had her check me at 37 weeks, and I was already 3 centimeters dilated and like 70% effaced. So wow. She was like, yep, you're fine. Your body's doing what it's supposed to do. You don't need to pick up anything extra. Go right ahead. So then 38 weeks, I had progressed a little bit more. I was like 4 centimeters dilated and 80% effaced. So just slight progression. 39 weeks, no progression. And then at 39 and 4, it was totally just a normal day. I had taken the day off work because I just wanted to relax. And I thought, I'm just going to take the day and enjoy. So I woke up, I exercised, I took a bath. It was totally normal. No signs of anything whatsoever. Went and walked around all day out at an auction with my dad. We were looking at some stuff, and so I was active, but it was freezing and no contractions. Got home. I was so tired. I just laid down. I'm like, I'm just going to read a book and lay here. And I started feeling contractions, and I was so confused. I was like, I can't start this until like 41 weeks. Like, I know that's what first-time moms do, and this can't be real. So yeah, I started feeling contractions. I didn't want to time them on the app yet. I was just looking at my watch on and off. I think they were like 6 to 10 minutes apart. Yeah, I just didn't believe it was real, I think. And so I didn't want to like false alarm. I'm playing with my app. I just thought that would make me more anxious. So I'm like, no, I'm just going to let it play out. I definitely didn't want to tell my husband, Taylor, because I knew that would cause him anxiety. So I'm like, I'm just going to see if this is real. I'll tell him later. It's fine. So after laying down for a while, I'm like, I'm going to go on a walk. I invited him, and he came, and we went on a walk. He still didn't know. I was still could just breathe through them, and I didn't really pick them up, but they stayed 6 to 10 minutes apart. And I came back and bounced on my birth ball, did all the things. I'm like, I'm just changing all the movements and seeing if it comes. So I'm bouncing on the ball, reading my book. And after a little bit of that, I'm like, okay, I think they're picking up. I should probably start timing them. So I pulled out my app. At that point, they were like 5 minutes apart and maybe 45 seconds long to a minute. And I think I stayed in the nursery on the bouncing ball for at least an hour with those kind of contractions. And then I'm like, okay, this is real. It's not stopping. I'm going to go in and pack the last minute things that in my bag. So I still haven't told Taylor yet. And he's in here. He was like working on the computer. It was late at night. I guess my first contraction was around 5:30. So this is probably like 7:30 at night. And he's working and I'm like running and grabbing toiletries out of the bathroom and putting them in the bag in the bedroom, like trying to be so discreet. And then I'd like go in the back of the bedroom and like lean over the bed and have a contraction and then like hurry and jump back up and act like everything was normal and like go. And I went and got the sheet the midwife had given me of numbers to call depending on what time of day it was. And I'm like explaining it to him and he's like, yeah, go ahead and put it on the fridge. So I stick it on the fridge and then like run back in the room and have a contraction. And then I'm like, oh, I should shave my legs. So I go get in the bath. I don't know if I was just really anxious about being in the bath that I thought it was going to slow my contractions down or if they really did slow, but I like got in there and I felt like they were slowing. So I like hurried and jumped back out. I'm like, no, don't stop now. We're already so far into this. So yeah, I got out and then I came out and I'm like, Taylor, I think it's time. Like you should pack your bag. We've been talking about it for weeks. I'll help you pack your bag. He's like, yeah, I'll come in like 15 minutes. And I'm like, okay. So I go back in and I'm like having contractions on and off. And then he finally comes in and he goes in the closet to grab stuff. And when he's coming out, I just like gave him a big hug and I said, honey, we're having a baby tonight. And oh, even just like saying that makes me want to cry. It was like so emotional. And so exciting. And he just like got big eyes and like pulls me away and is like, wait, how do you know? Is this real? And I'm like, yeah, I'm having contractions at least for the last like 3 hours. And they're like 4 to 5 minutes apart right now. And he's like, what? He was so confused. I'm like, well, I can handle them just fine. Why would I tell you and stress you out? So yeah, then he pulled out his app. He very much wanted to be a part of it. And he had downloaded an app timer or a contraction timer and was timing all of them as much as I was. And at one point he's like, here, he'd like have to go to the other room. He's like, here, started on my phone too. He wanted it on both phones to prove it to himself, I think, but he was so cute. But yeah, he was pretty anxious. And at that point, he's like, so have you told anyone? Did you tell your midwife? Have you called your doula? And I'm like, I was just thinking of texting my doula because I want her to know before she goes to bed at night, just so she has a heads up. It was like 9 o'clock by the time I told him. So I got on the phone and was texting my doula. He called the midwife just to let her know that it's potentially happening tonight. And I sent a screenshot of my last contractions to my doula and she immediately calls me and is like, dear, I think you should go to the hospital. And I'm like, no, I shouldn't. I'm handling these just fine and everything's good. And she's like, yeah, but like, how long have these been happening? And I'm like, 2 hours or so. I don't know. And she's like, yeah, I want you to meet me at the hospital. I'm like, no, I'm not ready. You can come here. And she's like, okay, I'm on my way there. But in the meantime, she was like 45 minutes away. She's like, if in the meantime you need to go to the hospital, just text me and I'll meet you there. She was really like, yeah, you should be at the hospital already. And actually, while I was on the phone with her, so funny, my husband's app starts like blinking red saying, go to the hospital, go to the hospital. So his anxiety's just like shooting through the roof. Like, my wife's crazy. Why are we still here? So yeah, she got here and we stayed at the house for maybe 45 minutes with her. And honestly, as soon as she got here, like Taylor's anxiety went right down. And it was so nice for him to be able to talk to her and be like, okay, what's Starlee doing? Why is she doing that? Why is she leaning over? What does this mean? You know? And she was able to explain like, no, it's okay. She's listening to her body. This is totally normal. You know, women can be like this for hours. You know, she was just explaining everything. And it was so helpful for him to have that. So then after like 45 minutes, she's like, my contractions had picked up a little. And she was like, it kind of looks like you're not getting a break. Like you're getting some back to back. And I'm like, yeah, but at this point I was still managing completely on my own. I I mean, like, yeah, emotional support, but I wasn't getting any counter pressure or any like support like that from them. And I was totally just like walking around the house and I'm like, oh, I'm going to hurry and clean the bathroom in between contractions. And I'm going to hurry and sweep the floor so my house is clean. I don't know. And at that point she was just like, yeah, I think we should probably go. And I'm like, okay, I guess we can go. It was almost midnight when we got to the hospital. The ride wasn't as bad as I thought, but it was also only 5 minutes. So, you know, I was kind of like leaning over I was in the front seat because I had told my husband, I'm like, go put everything in the trunk. And maybe I didn't say the trunk, but he went and put it all in the back seat because I planned on being in the back seat. And I'm like, honey, where am I supposed to go? He's like, I don't know. Sit in the front seat. So, yeah, we got to the hospital, we got checked into triage and they measured me and I was still 4 centimeters and like 90% of face. In my head, I'm thinking, see guys, I wasn't ready to come to the hospital. Like I knew I had more time, but I wasn't necessarily discouraged because in my head, I was in it for the long haul and I was expecting like a 24-hour, 36-hour labor. First time mom. That's kind of what my sisters and my mom had done if they went unmedicated, that they were really long labors. So I was totally expecting something really long. So in triage, they came and checked me every 30 minutes or so. And they kind of kept saying, well, we'll give you another 30 minutes. Like you're not, you know, like you're in legit labor, but from what we're seeing, you're not progressing, right? Your dilation and your effacement are kind of staying the same. And you've been like this for 3 or 4 weeks, you know? The only thing that they did say every time they checked me, they were like, your bag of waters is getting more and more bulgy. Like as soon as this thing breaks, your baby is going to be here so fast. And I'm like, okay, yeah, don't break it. I don't want it to break. I want it to do its own thing. And I was also nervous being GBS positive. I was like, I don't want it to break any sooner than it needs to. And I don't want to be put on a timeline. All of the things that are in my head of no, don't let it break. I am progressing just fine. And in triage, although I wasn't progressing like by dilation and effacement, my contractions were picking up a ton. So within about 30 minutes of being at the hospital, I was needing a lot of support. And my husband and my doula were doing a lot of counter pressure and I was walking and just all the things to try to cope through the contractions, I guess. And we were in triage for about 2 hours and finally the nurses came in and they're like, so we've talked to the midwife, you haven't progressed anymore, but given that you're GBS positive, she's okay to admit you, start antibiotics and she'll come in 4 hours or so and break your waters and get things moving. And that was really discouraging. That was the first point that I kind of felt like, oh, things aren't going like I want to go. And I was thinking out loud. I'm like, well, my other option is to go home, which I'm not going to be able to sleep in between these contractions. They're coming too close together and I need so much support on every single one. Like that's not an option. I can't go home anymore. Like we're here. And they were like, yeah. And I'm like, okay, so my one option is to get admitted. Let's do this, I guess, and hope that things start moving. So I got admitted, got the antibiotics. They were not a bad experience for me. I've heard a lot of people say that that's one of the most painful things, and I didn't notice it at all. I think they were done in like 20 minutes. And as soon as it was in, I'm like, let's get in the bath. I need something different. What we were doing was not enough anymore. So I got in the tub and it just got so intense. And I thought, this is not Mother Nature's epidural. Like, this is not what people say it is. I am not getting the relief I need.
I've been lied to.
I've totally been lied to. And given, okay, the hospital that I was at, it was a very like normal thing of like a house tub. So like when I was sitting down and the water was full, it came up to like maybe my belly button. So I wasn't fully immersed either. I'm like, this is totally why, like, I'm sure people weren't lying to me. Like, this is just, I'm not getting what I need. And my husband was doing a lot of counter pressure and my doula was pinching a bundle of nerves like and between my thumb and pointer finger. And that was really helpful. And then at one point, my husband was like pouring water down my back. I don't know why that was so relieving for like 2 contractions. That totally did it for me, is just having water poured over my back. But it didn't last long. It was very like, I had to continually communicate and be like, okay, yeah, we need something new. This contraction, that like I was at the end of the support you were giving me on that one. I need something new. And so they were just changing up everything, trying different things. And after like 45 minutes in the bath, I just looked at my doula and said, I'm done. I cannot do this anymore. Like, I want the epidural. Like, I'm going to get out of this tub and I'm going to get checked. And if I'm not progressed, we're done. This isn't worth it to me. And that was like in the middle of a contraction that I'm telling her this. And she's like, yeah, let's talk after the contraction. Like, you're fine. Keep going. You got this. And I'm like, okay, like, yeah, but we're talking about this. Like, don't think you're getting out of this. We're talking about this as soon as it's over. And, yeah, so we're talking about it and she's like, okay, let's do one more here and then we'll hurry and get up. Well, you know, they were getting everything ready there. She's like, do one last contraction here. We'll have a towel ready for you and we'll hurry and move to the bed. They can check you and we'll see where things are at. And I'm like, okay, I'm okay with that plan. Also at some point in the tub, she was like, you can like let out some air, like when you're breathing through a contraction. I'm like, oh, okay. So I was like doing a long, during my contractions. And that was actually very relieving too. That was really helpful. So anyway, I get out of the tub, get on the bed. She checks me and she's like, oh, you're like 100% effaced and 8 centimeters dilated. And I'm like, oh, okay, this makes sense. Maybe the tub was doing it. I was just like, you know, I went 4 centimeters. So maybe that's why it was so intense. And then I did like 2 more contractions. They were trying to like set up the bed so that I could be like kneeling at the head of the bed. So I was just standing, kind of leaning over the bed, and my husband was doing the double hip squeeze. And after like 2 contractions, my body just started pushing, and it was the weirdest thing. I like couldn't do anything about it. It almost felt to me like the urge of throwing up. There's nothing you can do to stop it. It just like your body just pushes and pushes. That's what it felt like to me, of just like my body was pushing this baby out and there was nothing I could do to stop it. So I look at the nurse and I'm like, my body's pushing. And she looks at me and she's like, okay, let's hurry and check you. She checked me and sure enough, she's like, yeah, you're complete. You can go for it. At this point, they were starting to stress out. Like, okay, we told the midwife 5 minutes ago that you were an 8 and she was 30 minutes away. So let's see how this goes. It was also a snowstorm. Yeah. And she had to come around the mountain and was like, they were worried she wasn't going to make it. But at this point, my bag of waters is still intact and I'm pushing and they're like starting to see my bag of waters come out of me. And it was just like, it looked like this yellow balloon kind of like coming out of me. It was the weirdest thing ever. And I reached out, I remember feeling it and being like, wait, is that his head? And they're like, no, that's your water. And it was just so slimy. And I was so confused. And I'm like, why isn't this broken yet? But I'm totally content because I'm GBS positive and I've only gotten 1 round of antibiotics. So, which kind of in my the back of my head was my goal. My midwife had told me that 2 is ideal. We don't want anything more than 2. And if you get 1, that'll be just fine. And I was like, okay, yeah, let's go with just the 1. So I pushed, kind of leaning over the head of the bed for 20 minutes and then switched to a squat bar. And I was on the squat bar for maybe like 20 minutes as well. Just pushing every contraction and getting so much help. My nurse is on one side of my hip and my husband's on the other side, and they're both pushing as hard as they can. And my doula's in my face, like, pushing on my knee. And there's another just on my other knee. Like, there were so many people around me just giving me so much support. It was amazing. At one point, I just like looked at my husband and looked at my doula, and I'm just like in tears. And I'm just like, you guys are so amazing. Like, you guys are so good. I couldn't do this without you. And my nurse just looks at me and laughs. And she's like, I don't think I've ever heard someone say that. Usually we're the ones telling you that you're doing great. And I'm like, no, you guys are so good. I couldn't do this without you. And Yeah. So after being on the squat bar for like 20 minutes, my midwife made it and she ran in, and about that time my water broke and I looked down and I could see it and it was not clear. But I wasn't stressed. I was like, it's fine. Baby's coming. I'll be all right. So they hurried and called in like the NICU team to be there in the side. They were just kind of in the corner. But also before that, there were like maybe 10 nurses in there because they all wanted to see my bag of waters. They thought he was going to be born in call. So there's like all like I was totally the star of the show. And there were like 10 nurses lining up on the side of the room, like watching my bag of waters come out. As soon as it broke, they all left and the NICU team came in. It was way less exciting. And yeah, so then my midwife got there and I ended up going back to the head of the bed, kind of on my high knees and pushing there. That was easier for me. I have a really long torso. And I was so tired at this point. At this point, it's like 4 a.m. and I'm leaning over the head of the bed and just kind of exhausted and needed something to fully carry my weight. Yeah. And then as soon as my water broke, I definitely felt more of like the ring of fire and baby's head descending. And up to that point, I had tried not to push. I kind of wanted to breathe my baby out. But at that point, I was so tired and like the ring of fire was so intense. I'm like, we have got to get him out. I am not holding him here any longer than I have to. And I'm like starting to push a little bit more. And then he came out. And he was here and he was behind me. So like my midwife caught him behind me. And so then I like stand up and I'm like lifting my leg up and over the umbilical cord, trying to like get turned around and put him on my chest. And then they helped me sit down. They were all nervous. And I sat down and just snuggled him. And it was the best thing ever. We snuggled for like 2 hours before they even attempted to take him off me. It was great.
That's awesome. That's a really neat story. Okay. Can I take you back to the beginning for a moment and just ask you, because I know moms love to hear about this. I love to hear about it too. What did the contractions at the beginning feel like for you? And if you've had Braxton Hicks, will you talk about the difference, if you could tell what the difference was?
They definitely were different. Braxton Hicks to me just felt like, I felt it more in my stomach just tightening, almost like, like my abs were tightening, almost like if I were doing a crunch, like it just felt really tight. Whereas my first contractions were much more like a period cramp. Like it felt like a menstrual cramp and it was a lot lower. And honestly, during my real contractions, I don't think I ever felt like my stomach tightening. And maybe I wasn't focusing enough on it. I didn't feel my stomach tightening. It was more just like menstrual cramps down low.
And did it remain like that? Or how did those change or progress as time went on?
I think they just got more intense. But they were pretty much period cramps the whole way through until I was pushing. And then I guess I did feel like the whole tightening of everything to push him out.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I think probably my favorite parts of your story are just like you had said, like all that support. It is so interesting how when you feel safe emotionally because of the space that is being kept around you for you, that you can lean into that. Like you're not worrying about, is the doctor going to recommend something? I don't like your head doesn't have to be anywhere else. It can be focused right here, right now on this contraction and working through this one spot. Were there any like mantras or like what was happening in your head? Were there things that you were saying to yourself like keep going, or were there anything like that helped you get through it?
Yes. When I was in the tub, my doula asked me this. I think it was right before I was asking for an epidural. She's like, why are you choosing to do this? Why is this important to you? And I just told her, I believe that God made my body to do this. I was designed for this and I can do this. And so I kind of kept that in my head of saying, God made my body to do this. This is how it's supposed to be. And that was really helpful. And then once she knew that, she kind of helped remind me that anytime that my voice started getting a lot higher, she would like calm me down and be like, no, God, you made your body to do this. You can do this. And And I had made all these cute affirmation cards, but it all just happened so fast. We didn't even have time to get them out in the hospital. Like, because by the time I was admitted, I was only in the room for 2 hours, one of which was in the tub and one of which was pushing. Like, there wasn't time to put out my cute affirmations or put up the little lights that she had brought and all of those things, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. So with that being your affirmation, were there any did you feel like spiritually any closer to your God or your creator? Was there anything like special about that being your affirmation as you look back on
absolutely.
that?
It was so, I don't know, kind of like a sacred space in there. And there were several times that I was praying in my head, and then several times that I actually vocalized my prayers. And I was just saying, Heavenly Father, please help me. And I need support now. And I remember when I was pushing the last 20 minutes before he came out. Yeah, I was just vocalizing so loud of, Heavenly Father, help him move down, help him move down. And I was also rubbing my belly and talking to him, to my baby as well, and saying, we're ready for you when you're ready. We love you. Come down. But I think that together with praying and talking to baby just created such a sacred, kind of like a spiritual environment during that whole labor.
I'll say, as a doula, I don't think there's anything better than being in that space with somebody. It is very sacred. And when a new baby is born, the entire experience is very special with the mom. And then with that new life there, it's you can't explain it unless you're there, unless you're experiencing it. But it's a very sacred space. I don't think you could say that any different, any more perfectly. I completely agree with that. So it's neat that you were able to experience that and feel that. I know a lot of the times, there's just so much going on and it feels so crazy that sometimes we don't get to feel that pause or notice it until later. But I love that you were able to feel it in the moment. That's pretty neat. I do like to end these episodes with any advice that you have for moms and or partners. So if you could give your best advice to moms that are listening, what is something that you would say that you think would be really helpful to them? And then same question for dads that are listening.
I would just say, trust your body. I don't know. That's kind of what I lived by. My body is not going to do it wrong. God made my body to do it this way. And staying in that mindset was so helpful. Just trust your body. Your body knows what it's doing. And don't let a provider tell you otherwise, that your baby's too big, or, obviously there are circumstances that's true, but don't let other people derail you. Do what you want to do and be confident and trust in that, because that's really what you're made to do. And then the other thing would be to communicate. And this is something that my doula was in mid-labor. She was you are communicating so well and telling us exactly what you need. And it is so helpful. So just communicate, and partners, I guess, be willing to accept that communication. It doesn't mean you're doing something wrong, but from one contraction to the next, things change. And what worked on one contraction may not work on the next contraction. And several times I was just I need something more this contraction. We have to switch it up. And my doula would come up with something different, or my husband would suggest something and we would try it. But keeping that open line of communication was so important. And yeah those
awesome.
Would be my biggest things.
That's great advice. I love I hope we quote that this week on Instagram, just from one contraction to the next, you can need something completely different. So, don't take it personally. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing your birth story here. It was very special and I loved hearing it. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
That's it for this week, but make sure you subscribe to the podcast so that you get notifications first as I drop a new episode every week. And don't forget to head over to myessentialbirth.com for all of the free downloads mentioned here and to join the birth course and community serving pregnant moms just like you. If you enjoyed this and other episodes, I would love it if you would take a few minutes to leave a review on Apple Podcasts. I read every single one and include one at the beginning of each episode. See you next week.